know that most of what you've seen, read, or heard about Billy the Kid is untrue? My name is Gale Cooper. I'm a medical doctor and forensic psychiatrist. My specialty is murder case consultation for the defense. For 20 years, I've used my expertise to uncover the real Billy the Kid. Researching over 40,000 pages of archival documents and books, I've written the revisionist history. It's shocking, it's liberating, and I've written books demolishing the hoaxes, hijacking the history. My talks will share with you what I've found. Cover-ups, misinformation, and fakery, to use Old West lingo, will bite the dust. This begins my talks on the Santa Fe Ring, the corrupt political cabal which seized New Mexico Territory's land, government, and economy. The information comes from my book, The Santa Fe Ring versus Billy the Kid, The Making of an American Monster. The monster is the ring. It's also their made-up monster, the outlaw Billy the Kid, as cover-up. Writing the history of Billy the Kid and the Lincoln County War and leaving out the Santa Fe Ring is like writing the history of the Civil War and leaving out slavery. Great evil propelled the events. Including the ring is key to my revisionist history. The Santa Fe Ring began as a racist, profiteering land grab scheme involving millions of acres. The 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War, had added 525,000 square miles of northern Mexico to the victorious United States. The treaty promised citizenship and retained land ownership to its 75,000 Hispanic residents. Ultimately carved out was almost square New Mexico territory. It had 121,697 square miles. About 15 million acres were land grants. Within 2 decades, Hispanic land grant holders became victims. This paralleled genocide of Native Americans to get their land. The Santa Fe Ring was the scheme of Missourian attorneys Stephen Benton Elkins and Thomas Benton Catron. They used a loophole in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Grant holders had to prove ownership. Then they needed confirmation by Congress. Catron and Elkins pretended to represent them. Then they'd buy the land far below value and resell it at a great profit. Hiding multi-million-acre theft needed complicit government. So Catron and Elkins took legislative and judicial positions and made corrupt alliances. By 1873, Elkins became territorial delegate and entangled Washington politicians for ring protection. Opponents were destroyed by malicious prosecutions or murder. Legal redress was impossible. Catron and Elkins diversified to banks, loans, railroads, mining, mercantile enterprises, and ranching. The burgeoning ring tyranny precipitated territory-wide uprisings in the 1870s. They're discussed in a separate talk. But by the 1878 days of the Lincoln County War freedom fight, ring-biased President Rutherford B. Hayes covered up ring atrocities so well that his and his responsible cabinetmen's reputations remained unscathed. The successful ring took the victor's option of writing the history. So it called its opponents outlaws, and it denied its own existence. A quirk of history made these lies last. The ring stayed in power to the present, and the oppressed citizenry stayed silent in learned helplessness. Billy the Kid history fell victim to this blight. Scholarly researchers in the 20th century meekly omitted the ring. Fawning hagiographers of the original ring bosses, Catron and Elkins, pooh-poohed its reality. 20th century ring-biased historian Victor Westphal, in his 1973 book, Thomas Benton Catron and His Era, mimicked antique ringites. He called the ring a fantasy. He wrote, "It was a romantic imagination of a sinister organization with members dedicated to unqualified promotion of their own selfish interests, accompanied by connotations of violence, deception, deceit, fraud, and other nefarious implications." Westphal blamed Democrats and fate. He wrote, "Thomas Benton Catron was present when the Republican Party in New Mexico was organized in the winter of 1867 and when the epithet Santa Fe Ring was applied to its leaders. It was Catron's fate to become the acknowledged head of both party and ring. While Catron was often assailed as leader of the ring, he held that position by virtue of ability as a common spokesman for others interested in common goals." Westphal used the ring's own cover-up that it was not a formal organization. He wrote, quote, "There's no network of control in an organized sense. There was mutual cooperation for particular events or projects," close quote. Such evaded culpability by ringites was satirized by 19th century cartoonist Thomas Nast. He drew Boss Tweed's Tammany Hall ring as a circle of men, each pointing to the other, saying, "'Twas him." So step one for condemning the ring is exposing its existence. First, one needs to understand democracy. America's founding fathers anticipated tyranny's temptation, so they divided government into executive, legislative, and judicial branches to monitor each other. It was called checks and balances. Unanticipated was takeover of all branches by one cabal. That was the Santa Fe Ring's brainchild. Other criminal minds had hit on that formula. The 19th century mafia also had fixed structure. For the Santa Fe Ring, boss Thomas Benton Catron ran the territory. Stephen Benton Elkins managed Washington, D.C. Their local sub-bosses exercised power, as in Lincoln County's mercantile and ranching monopolies. Their enforcers were lawmen, judges, and district attorneys. Associates were hired thugs for rustling, terrorism, and assassinations. Secrecy was by cipher code communication, expurgation of incriminating records, and denial of existence. The higher-ups evaded connection to their minions' crimes by claiming plausible deniability. That meant 'twas him, not me. The mafia's growth spurt came from prohibition. The rings came from stealing massive Hispanic land grants. It was not until 1970, 104 years after Catron and Elkins began their ring, that Congress defeated plausible denial by passing the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, RICO. It enabled prosecution of all conspirators having the same criminal objective. It stated, if conspirators have a plan which calls for some conspirators to commit the crime and others to provide support, the supporters are as guilty as the perpetrators. RICO ultimately pitted law enforcement against the mafia underworld. But there was no one to prosecute the Santa Fe ring. They were the law. They were the world. They encompassed the territory and infiltrated the federal government. And unlike the mafia, no insider has ever broken ranks. Nevertheless, RICO's making supporters as guilty as perpetrators is key to condemning the ring's monsters. There was no doubt about the ring's existence. It was well known to its victims and well publicized. From its early days, even national press compared it to Boss Tweed's New York ring. An editorial in March 13, 1876's the Boston Daily Globe was titled, New Mexico, a sorry showing for a would-be state, Tweed's disciples preying on the populace. It stated, the territorial government, executive and judicial, is as closely an allied ring as ever inflicted itself upon a people. Its headquarters is at Santa Fe, and it includes among its members public officials of every grade, and is ably assisted in its operations by the judicial element of the government and its official organ, the Santa Fe New Mexican newspaper. Justice in the territory is a sad delusion. The probate judges always have a hand in the election of the juries and completely control the cases before the courts. In New Mexico Territory, October 27, 1880's Las Cruces 34 newspaper wrote, the Santa Fe ring is the most corrupt combination that ever cursed any country or community. It has controlled the machinery of the Republican Party in the territory for the past 12 years. It has vilified, oppressed, or otherwise sought to ruin every man who had the independence and hardihood to oppose its corrupt schemes. It has grown fat upon the prostitution of the party it controls. It has used its power in the courts to defend its criminal tools from merited punishment. It has retained its power by wholesale bribery and intimidation of voters. It has threatened innocent men with prosecution in the courts should they dare to oppose it. It has promised indicted criminals immunity from punishment if they would assist it to retain its power. The people of this county and every county will be benefited by its overthrow. Ring accusations against T.B. Catron continued into the 20th century. A December 11, 1911 letter of a Bronson cutting to a James Roger Addison stated, Catron was the boss of the territory from 1865, it was 1866, to 1900, and is probably still the most unscrupulous man in the Southwest. His methods of wholesale assassination and blackmail are notorious. He still runs the gang in this country. Oppressed citizens became the ring's risk. The ring thwarted their rebellions by rigged elections, malicious prosecutions, terrorist threats, forced flight, troops, biased press, and murder. They were defeated, but they documented the ring's existence. I'll let them speak. In the Tinderkeg grassroots uprisings of the 1870s, contemporary reports and exposés by ring adversaries and victims are profuse. I'll discuss the uprisings more in a talk of their own, but they're the 1872 Legislature Revolt, the 1876 Grand County Rebellion, the 1877 Colfax County War, and the 1878 Lincoln County War. And these fighters certainly reported that the ring existed. For the 1872 Legislature Revolt in Santa Fe, January 1872's Denver Rocky Mountain News decried the ring's attack on antagonistic legislators. It called it, quote, unparalleled in the history of Western politics, close quote. Federal troops were brought into the legislature to aid in voiding anti-ring legislation. The paper called the Santa Fe Ring a political and economic clique. The 1876 Grand County Rebellion generated a Declaration of Independence announcing intent to secede to Arizona Territory to escape the ring. On October 7th, their Grand County Herald printed it. It stated, "We consider the territory of New Mexico badly governed, owing to the fact that the chief power in the territorial legislation rests in the hands of a selfish oligarchy who designedly wield the same in their own selfish interests." In 1877, the Colfax County War peaked. Mary Tibbles McPherson, the firebrand mother-in-law of the local anti-ring newspaper's editor, sent her own charges to Washington against ringites. On May 1st, 1877, she submitted her charges against New Mexican officials together with corroboration evidence. It stated, "The undersigned, in behalf of the people of the territory of New Mexico, herewith present the following charges." She charged U.S. Attorney Thomas B. Catron, Judge Warren Bristol, Chief Justice Henry L. Waldo, Governor Samuel B. Axtell, and others unnamed with, quote, "having conspired together to corrupt and defraud justice and defeat the ends thereof, both by fraudulent and illegal practices in their respective districts and offices, and by procuring the passage of insidious legislative enactments tending to dismemberment, confusion, and centralization of power, and designed to protect infamy, legalize crime, deprive its citizens of personal liberty and the right of trial by jury, compass the revenues of the territory and the property of all its citizens for purposes of private gain." And she requested, quote, "their removal from office." In August of 1877, McPherson submitted her 31-page typeset booklet, "In the Matter of Charges versus Governor S.B. Axtell and Other New Mexico Officials," to the Departments of the Interior and Justice. It stated, "That there has existed in Santa Fe for several years past a ring is now beyond question. That this ring has, by its power and influence, controlled all the offices, revenues, and courts of the territory, and that they have used this power to oppress, intimidate, and plunder the people, cannot now be denied." The 1878 Lincoln County War generated many responses confirming the Santa Fe ring's existence. Billy Bonney himself knew the ring existed. On July 13, 1878, the day before the start of the Lincoln County War battle, he wrote his regulator manifesto letter to ring boss T.B. Catron's brother-in-law. Billy stated, "We're all aware that your brother-in-law, T.B. Catron, sustains the Murphy-Kinney party. Steal from the poorest or richest American or Mexican, and the full measure of the injury you do shall be visited upon the property of Mr. Catron. He signed it as regulator. John Henry Tunstall's letters to his British family documented the ring. On April 27, 1877, he wrote to his father, "Everything in New Mexico that pays at all, you may say, is worked by a ring." Alexander McSween's February 23, 1878 letter to just murdered Tunstall's father, John Partridge Tunstall, stated, "Tunstall understood well, from the U.S. Attorney, that meant Catron, to the lowest magistrate, that there was a combination and determination to keep down independence. This combination is known as the Santa Fe Ring. To the branch of the ring down here, he had become particularly obnoxious, owing to the fact that he was acquiring so much land, and because I aided him." Lily Klasner, engaged to Bob Ollinger when he was killed on April 28, 1881, by Billy Bonney in his famous jailbreak, had her manuscript published posthumously in 1972 as My Girlhood Among Outlaws. She wrote, "John Chisholm suffered at the hands of the powerful Santa Fe Ring of those days. This ring, a group of politicians and businessmen, sought to control the courts and everything else in the state," she meant territory, "and to get their hands on as much resources of the state as possible to exploit in their own interests. In other words, they were greedy for personal gain and sought to obtain it by fair means or foul, most frequently the latter." Thomas B. Catron, then United States District Attorney, was commonly regarded as one of the most influential members of the Santa Fe Ring, if not its guiding spirit. Cattle King John Chisholm himself wrote a sarcastic account of the Santa Fe Ring, dated January 16, 1878, while in false imprisonment by Boss Catron in Las Vegas, New Mexico territory. The Lincoln County War was 6 months in the future. Chisholm wrote, "I know it is said by many of the citizens that there's a ring at Santa Fe, but as the governor," that was Axtell, "said in his last message, there was no ring, and I'm of his opinion. If there was a ring, there would be some show for the people, as a ring is not solid, and there would be some show to get through it, or to get on the outside or inside of it. But the thing they have got there is perfectly solid. It cannot be penetrated from neither side or end, and it is perfectly hard and solid. And when this solid substance strikes a citizen, it goes right through him and leaves him in such a condition that he never recovers from it. It is so powerful that it don't only ruin citizens, but sometimes it strikes whole counties." David Shield, ring-murdered Alexander McSween's brother-in-law, writing on July 30, 1878 for a loan to Montague Leverson, a Colorado friend of John Chisholm, said, "I do not wish to place myself under any obligation to the ring or their clique, and they control everything here." Investigator Frank Warner Angel had written reports about the murder of John Tunstall for the Hayes administration. He was apparently forced to cover up the ring in his reports, but he took his own covert action for justice. He sent incoming Governor Lew Wallace a copy of Mary McPherson's August 1877 printed booklet, which she had sent to President Hayes. It exposed the Santa Fe Ring, its members, and their crimes. Angel also prepared for Wallace a secret handwritten notebook listing ringites. Here are some examples. Under newspapers was, quote, "Las Vegas Gazette, Republican, favors the ring. Santa Fe, New Mexican, ring paper, Republican. And the Independent, Mesilla News, ring papers. Individuals were listed alphabetically. Here are some examples: Dolan, J.J., Lincoln Leader in Lincoln County Trouble, Murphy Party, Brave, Sharp, Determined Fellow, badly mixed up with the ring. Loud, Lieutenant, Santa Fe, officious, works for the ring, not reliable. Longwill, Doctor, Santa Fe, good doctor, but mixed up in Colfax County troubles. Axtell man, ring man, do not rely on him. Thornton, W.T. Santa Fe, Catron's partner. Walsh, E.A., Lincoln, a tool of Catron, a boy, not reliable. Lew Wallace took office as governor on October 1, 1878. A little over a month later, on November 14, 1878, he wrote secretly to his Civil War friend, Colonel Absalom Markland, "I came here and found a ring with a hand on the throat of the territory. I refused to join them, and now they're proposing to fight me in the Senate. Ex-territorial delegate Elkins is head center in Washington." Susan McSween, widow of Alexander McSween, who was murdered in the Lincoln County War, hired an attorney named Houston Chapman to prosecute Fort Stanton's commander, N.A.M. Dudley, for her husband's murder and arson of her home. On November 29, 1878, Chapman wrote to Lew Wallace, "The McSween men are willing to stand their trial in the proper courts of the territory or to observe your proclamation of amnesty, provided the other side, or ring, observe it." After the ring murdered Chapman, his office mate, Ira Leonard, took over the case against Dudley. He also became an advisor to Lew Wallace. Well aware of the ring, he wrote the following to Wallace on May 20th, 1879. The Murphy-Dolan party had for a long time uninterrupted sway in this county and could not brook opposition, and they were determined either by fair or foul means to have no opposition, and they resorted to every artifice in their power to accomplish that purpose. They were a part and parcel of the Santa Fe ring that has been so long an incubus on the government of this territory. Cautious Pat Garrett did not name the ring in his 1882 ghost-written book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, but he made clear that T.B. Catron backed the side fighting Alexander McSween. The book stated, "It is not the intention here to discuss the merits of the imbroglio, meaning the Lincoln County War, but merely to detail such events of the war as Billy the Kid took part in. The principals in this difficulty were on one side John S. Chisholm, called the Cattle King of New Mexico, with Alexander A. McSween and John H. Tunstall as important allies. On the other side were the firm of Murphy and Dolan, merchants in Lincoln, the county seat, backed by nearly every small cattle owner in the Pecos Valley. This latter faction was supported by Thomas B. Catron, United States Attorney for the territory, a resident of Santa Fe, one of the eminent lawyers of the territory, and a considerable owner in the Pecos region. Obviously, there was no doubt to those present in New Mexico Territory's 1870s that the Santa Fe Ring existed. Other talks will detail the 1870s brave, desperate, and lost freedom fights against it.